are ill with the Ebola virus in West Africa, that you're going to be quarantined for 21 days. We need to protect the public safety of the folks in the most densely populated area in the country, and that's what we're going to do.
The Houston hospital that treated America's first Ebola contagious patient failed. The Centers for Disease Control and its preparation for just such an emergency failed. And in the minds of many, the Obama administration ensuring everything was being done to keep Americans safe failed. No wonder then the governors of New York and New Jersey took action on their own. The reaction, and the lawyers be damned. Pleasure to welcome to MidPoint our latest contributor, veteran litigator in Philadelphia County in the federal courts and a volunteer child advocate, and our legal expert, Heather Hansen, joins us. Heather, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Ed.
Heather, I have to tell you that there's a lot of people who think that Christie and Andrew Cuomo did exactly the right thing, being more concerned about their constituents than they were about one individual. Legally, though, I would guess they have the right to do that as governor, correct?
They do have the right to do that. The question is, where does that right fall against, here, the nurses' Fifth Amendment due process rights, 14th Amendment, her right to liberty, her right to privacy. And so the courts have to do a balancing act to determine whether the public good is greater than the nurses' own constitutional rights. Here, I think that it may not pass muster because it wasn't what is called the least restrictive way of doing it. So rather than having her in this tent, perhaps allowing her to go home, which is what Governor Christie ultimately did, was the best way to handle it.
So maybe he overreacted a little bit, but would the law then, if you were to take this to any sort of court, because apparently Casey Hickok says she's now going to sue the governor of New Jersey, wouldn't it at least the courts look at it and say he was not attempting to be egregious to the individual, but simply looking for the greater good of the state as he is charged to do?
Absolutely. I think Governor Christie did the right thing here by trying to set some parameters, because we really have had no parameters up until now. That allows for this to be the test case where the courts say, you can restrict these people, you can quarantine them, but this is the way that you have to do it. So he was absolutely within his right to quarantine her. Whether or not the extent of the quarantine that he had in mind is appropriate will be up to the courts.
Does she have a lawsuit in your opinion?
She did, but now that Governor Christie has let her go home, her lawsuit has sort of gone up in smoke because her civil rights are no longer being curtailed.
And lawyers everywhere in the area are going, almost had it, almost had it against the state of New Jersey.
So close,
Tried so close, yeah. Not yet. Wait a minute, we'll see if we can get there. All right, let's talk about some other things.
There'll be plenty of time.
Yeah, there's always plenty of time, trust me. Here's something else, state-sanctioned theft with civil forfeiture statutes. This I find is fascinating because if you're not involved in an actual criminal action, it would seem as if they can come and basically take everything that you own here, and this looks like a Supreme Court issue sooner or later.
It should be a Supreme Court issue. I mean, it is a travesty that the government can come in, if you've been suspected of a crime, take away your property, and the burden of proof is actually on you to prove that you have not committed the crime in order to get back your property. This has been an issue for many, many years. It's an issue that should and does cross both sides of the aisle, because whether you are the ACLU fighting for someone who is stuck in a traffic stop, or whether it is the situation that the IRS is taking away people's money because they're making deposits in a certain way, either way, the government should not be able to take away a person's property without due process.
But what if the government, or whomever is prosecuting this case, believes that they have sufficient enough evidence and they're able to show that there is sufficient evidence against an individual that they may have been involved in some sort of crime, or that they may have been able to profit from some sort of crime? Wouldn't that at least lead them to the possibility of being able to get into this situation?
And that's supposed to be the idea, Ed. This was supposed to be to stop racketeers, drug dealers, and it has been successful in doing so. The problem here is that there is a motivation for law enforcement officers. They get a cut of what they take. So suddenly you've given them motivation to take a lot more than may be necessary in order to stop the bad guys. And instead, it's casting such a wide net that you're bringing in the good guys as well, and that's just not right.
By the way, Heather, I just want to make the point to you and everybody else here, I am not a lawyer, but I do play one on TV. So let's just make that point right up front, because nobody can hold me to this. Let's get out here. Here's a fascinating case, and this comes down to the Boston bombing here. The friend of the Boston bomber, his name is Robel Philippos. The FBI, apparently, you have to make some sense of this, because the only thing I caught out of this was his lawyer says that he was too stoned to lie to the cops when they were trying to question him about where his friend was. This is a fascinating case.
It is fascinating. What's amazing to me is this jury has been out going on 4 or 5 days deliberating as to this teenager's guilt. The defense is simply that he had been smoking marijuana for 12 to 16 hours, and therefore he could not knowingly lie. He couldn't, it's an intent type of thing, that he couldn't create the intent to knowingly lie. And in his defense, Governor Michael Dukakis was a family friend who testified to the fact that this is a good kid who always acted appropriately, and that this was sort of a one-off. But the idea that you're going to use marijuana as a defense to being able to remember or lie is a new one. And it's so interesting that this jury has been out deliberating on that defense for so long.
What do you think it is that they're hung up on?
You know, I think it's the idea that this teenager may face 16 years in prison, and kind of setting that off against other people, corrupt politicians, especially in Massachusetts, who perhaps are getting off much more easily. So it may be what we call jury nullification, where despite the law and despite the facts, some members of this jury may just be unwilling to put this kid in jail for 16 years.
All right, and let's talk about finally President Obama and the possibility for amnesty for illegal immigrants at this point. We just had Representative Louis Gohmert on. He is another one who is incensed about the fact this executive action might be coming down. But I've often had this question: what's the legalese of being able to stop a president from taking an action like this?
It is very challenging, and legal minds far greater than mine have been debating this for some time. When the Congress wants to bring a case against the president for exceeding his authority, they have continuously been struck down by the Supreme Court, saying that there's no case or controversy. There's no actual issue here. There's no harm. Now, state by state, there has been some little door opening where different states have allowed members of the Congress to sue governors. So we may be in a position where you may actually see the Supreme Court allowing Congress to sue Obama if one of his executive actions takes over the job of Congress. And that's what this amnesty is looking to do.
However, we would just enter to say here for a moment that this is going to be going on for a long time. I mean, even if he does pass the legislation, they're still going to look.
That's right. There's going to be many different voices coming to play in here. There's going to be political issues as well as legal issues. You know, people are throwing the word impeachment around at times. There's a lot coming into play with regard to these executive actions. And remember, it's not the number, it's the quality of these actions that Obama's taking that is at issue.
I am so happy that I have you to do this so that people don't have to sit here and think that I know what I'm doing when it comes down to legalese. Heather Hansen, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Ed. See you later.
Take care. On the dance card next, investors fearing a major blow from China that could make for some shaky holidays. It's coming up next with the Money Master on MidPoint.